let's start with the evolution of selling. So as you all know, when you think about sales, sales is the oldest profession. There's some that say something else is, but you can say that sales is the oldest profession, right? From the time the wheel was invented. You can actually go back to the time that Adam and Eve and the serpent sold the apple, right? Like, that is the first job, was sales. Now, back then, it was feature benefit, right? So here's wheel, it rolls, put stuff on it. Over the million, 2 million, 3 million years after that, it evolved a little bit, but not much. Ford, 1923, they came up with something called the science of selling. The science of selling was this whole philosophy about analyzing the shape of one's forehead. That if they had a bigger forehead, their capacity for new ideas was higher. Really weird. I don't think it worked, but Ford's still around, so they must have done something right. But that evolved and continued to stay all focused on feature benefit. So at the time that door-to-door selling was going around, people would go out door-to-door, they'd have a vacuum, they'd ring your doorbell, door would open up, they'd have a handful of dirt, they'd throw it in the door. The person would be like, what the heck are you doing? And I'm like, let me show you. They'd plug in and show the features and the benefits of the vacuum. All right? So sales didn't evolve much, but then it started to. So around 1970 was when, or 1980 was when strategic selling came out. Miller and Hyman, basically what that was a way to look at complex accounts. We used to do these blue sheets, it was crazy, and you used it on like 1 out of every 10 of your deals, but it was the first time that people had really looked at structuring sales. And then spin selling came out. That was the beginning of, I think Nate mentioned it with consultative selling. All right, so Neil Rackham's spin selling, and it was about going through a sales cycle where 75% of your time in the cycle was spent on finding out what the other customer does, or what the buyer does. So what do they do, who do they do it with, who do they do it for, why do they do it that way, and then help them do it better. That's what consultative selling is. Then relationship selling came, Dale Carnegie with how to win friends and influence people, and then it bounced to solution selling. Solution selling was, going from selling products to putting it all together into a solution. And then challenger sale came. Now what this means though is that selling is still a lot feature benefit. It's just different evolutions of it. With each evolution, they didn't throw the old way to the curb. They evolved it a little bit. Obviously, challenger selling is more of like a provocative sale. It actually started 2 years earlier. Harvard Business Review article called Provoke Your Customers is when they really talked about showing your customer how their current status quo is no longer sustainable. Well, I believe, I'm a little biased, but that there's a new evolution coming. I wrote an article for OpenView earlier in the summer, I guess the end of spring, called The Transparency Sale. And what I believe is going to happen is, believe it or not, salespeople are going to have to learn how to be more honest. I know that sounds crazy that that's an evolution of selling, but the way the brain works, you're actually going to help your sales cycles of your team members, of your organization, if we start to go here. So what I'd like to do first is teach you about the buyer's brain. All right, again, 95% of decisions are made unconsciously. How do we tap into that? And how do we start to take advantage of the way the brain functions? And then what I want to take you into is the need for transparency and how that actually plays into the brain work, how the brain works. And then give you a few practical applications. We're testing out a few of these things. A few of the things, when we tried them out, the results have been pretty ridiculous in a good way. And so I want to share a couple of those ideas for you. All right, everybody with me? Think I'm crazy yet?
No.
Yeah, buckle up. All right, so let's start with transparency. So my daughter, we were sitting on the couch a few weeks ago, and we had Netflix up, and she had her iPad. And she's 6 years old. She was like, Dad, could you write princess in the search thing? So she wanted a princess app. So she's scrolling through, and then she looks up, she's looking at what I'm scrolling through on Netflix, and she's like, I want to watch that. I want to pick this this app. And I'm like, all right, well, how did that happen? And she was like, well, this one gets 4.5 stars, and that one's got high stars too. And I was like, maybe it's because I'm in the review space, but maybe it's because our kids are growing up surrounded by the accessibility of what other consumers think. consumers trust other consumers more than they trust your salespeople, right?
Yeah.
So with that, we're coming to a point where, obviously you've got iTunes and Amazon and Yelp and Netflix, and they're starting to score you on Uber. I think most of you probably know that, but when you go to Uber, you can get your own score. I actually took a screenshot of this for proof because nobody believed I was a 4.9, but I'm doing pretty well. I guess I'm not belligerent. So, but with that, what that means is our children are growing up with this expectation that all of this information is going to be available to them. So if you're not going to start to adjust towards transparency now, you better start thinking about it, all right? Because it's going to be an expectation as our kids grow up. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the brain. So the brain, let's just break it up into high-level 3 core parts. Number 1 is the reptilian brain, all right? So the reptilian brain basically is instinct. It's a lot of things that happen without you ever thinking about it. You touch something, it's hot, that's hot. You didn't have to think about it, just your reptilian brain kicking right in. But the next 2 pieces of this are the 2 pieces we need to pay attention to as sales enablers, as sales leaders, as sales professionals. This next piece here is the midbrain. That's your limbic system, all right? Now the way your limbic system works basically is the feelings, it's the emotions, all right? A couple of things you should know about it. First of all, there's something called a limbic filter. That limbic filter is something that you build up over time. Like you read a political tweet and you either really agree with it or you really hate it. But it's, the same tweet, the words didn't change, but there's differing opinions because people have these limbic filters the way they look at things. When you go into a department store, you go into a Nordstrom, and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can I help you find something? What do you say?
Just looking.
I'm just looking. It's not like you were outside the store going, oh, man, if this sales guy comes up to me, what am I going to say? Right? It's instinct. You've got a limbic filter that actually prevents you from being sold to. All right? And then you've got your neocortex. The neocortex is the logical part. All right? So that's where the data, that's typically how people justify decisions. But people make decisions based on feeling and then justify them with logic. There's a dude down the street that just bought, he's like my age, mid-40s, just bought a Corvette. If you ask him why he bought the Corvette, he talks about like the gas economy and how great, like all the features and all that. Well, we all know that's BS, right? He's buying it based on feeling. And how did Corvette sell it? They sell it based on feeling, all right? And that's good. If they sold it only on logic, they probably wouldn't sell as much. So that's something to keep in mind. The last thing I'll leave you with here about the limbic, the midbrain, is when people have brain damage to that midbrain, they lose their ability to feel. What's really interesting is they also lose their ability to make decisions. All right, you got that? If your midbrain is damaged and you can't feel, you can't decide. So what does that tell you? That the midbrain is that core function with which decisions get made. They'll look at 2 things and they'll go, can I have this orange juice or this water? They'll be like, nah. Right? Because their midbrain is damaged. So we need to focus on that limbic piece. All right? So what happens when that doesn't happen? Number 1, salespeople are taught to sell as though our products are perfect. They're taught to sell as though our product is a perfect 5.0 on a 5 scale, right? Like how many of you teach your salespeople that talk about how much we suck? Doesn't happen, right? But the buyer's brain requires it to make a decision. And so what happens? Number 1, hit Power Reviews. We did a study. So we're in, we collect and display ratings and reviews and Q&A on brand and retailer sites. So thousands of them. Crocs and, just go to a ton of them, you'll see them. What we found is that we did a study that shows the preponderance for somebody to read reviews and then click purchase. All right? What happened was that it was at its highest when the score was between a 4.2 and a 4.5. When it got to a 5, it actually went down. Like, isn't that crazy? So a perfect score actually lowers the conversion rate. And so why does that happen? When our salespeople go in and they sell as though we're a perfect 5, well, I'll tell you what happens today, and it's been happening since I've been starting to sell. If you do not present your product as being a 4.2 to 4.5, you sell it as a 5, what happens?
Well, your buyer does one of four things, really. They're going to start asking you for references, right? Like, what's the purpose of a reference? The reference isn't just to have a nice phone call. The reference is like, hey, can you tell me why these guys are a 4.2 to 4.5? Because the salesperson isn't. All right? And then they start back channeling you. They want to find that out. There's analysts that have been in the business of selling why companies are not perfect for years. Gartner, Forrester, there's analysts in every industry. That's why they're there. G2 Crowd is here. The reason G2 Crowd is exploding is because customers don't trust your salespeople's 5.0 speak. Right? So, you want to speed sales cycles? You got to start thinking about that. All right? So what ends up happening is I was up in New York a couple of months ago. It was this is probably 5 months ago now, but my rep, I happened to be in New York. I had a rep that was just like, hey, big fashion retailer wants to meet with somebody tomorrow. Any chance that like you can go? And I'm like, I'm already here in New York. Like, let's do it right now. And so I went over, met with the VP of e-commerce. He brought in his whole team, and I tried it. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about some of the particulars and the specifics of it. But it was us versus one of our big competitors. And I just tried it. And essentially, I laid out why we were 4.2 to 4.5 and not perfect. And what ended up happening? Well, first of all, the buyer, like, I thought he was going to hug me, first of all. Like, he became very disarmed. All right, this guy's not here to, we all over me and sell me. He's here to have a conversation and help me figure out what the best solution is. Number two is, like, obviously there was the trusting, but number three is the big one. Because whatever I said, I actually, part of my conversation when he asked about, like, what really differentiates you guys, part of my conversation was to say, here's what those guys are really good at, and we're not as good at. Like, I actually laid that out at the beginning. I was like, they have this feature, we don't. But then I spun it back to, like, here's why we've got a lot of momentum in the space, and here's why that applies to you. Like, we're not perfect. I've got an iPhone, right? My iPhone is my whole life. Man, some days it sucks, though, doesn't it? Right? Like, even the greatest technology in the world sometimes sucks. And that's basically the way that we're presenting our solutions. Like, we've got great technology. It's not always perfect. All right? And so what ends up happening is when the competitor comes in and goes, well, they don't do that, and they don't do that. They're like, oh, yeah, he already told me. And actually, that one's a lie. So it actually put the seller for the competitor completely at a disadvantage. The next piece is it reduces reference dependency, so we don't use references as much when we do this. There's almost never been a case where I've tried this and they've actually required the use of a reference. The sales cycle, I forgot to tell you, in this instance, at the end of the conversation, he kicked out the rest of the people in the room, and he pulled out a folder, and it had his budget on it. He was like, right there, can you hit that number for me in year one? Like, that has never happened to me, ever. And he showed it to me, and it wasn't, they say buyers are liars, but the guy actually pulled out his file. Like, he wasn't planning to do that. He's like, hit that number. Like, done, right? And we had a 2.5-week sales cycle for a major fashion brand in New York. All right? And then the last piece is when you tell the truth about your solutions and where the downfalls are, when they go through the implementation process, not only are they more open, but when things break, they're like, yeah, you told me that there might be some hiccups. So that is my argument for the need for transparency. So what I'd like to do is go into a little bit of practical applications to it. So this is the way we look at our sales cycle across the top. We layer in the buyer journey with the stages. We can kind of put them together. But obviously a buyer, what they do is they go through this cycle of, why should I change? Like, why is my status quo no longer sustainable? Once I've made that decision, why should I go with you? And then once I've made that decision, why should I do this now? All right? And so that's the way we think about the buyer journey and our stages. And so I'm going to break this into 3 different pieces. There's prospecting, there's presenting or actually having the dialogue with the client, and then there's negotiating. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Some of these are kind of crazy, so like I said, buckle up. And then I would love it if you guys start to implement some of these things. I'll give you my contact info. I mean, I want to write a book about this, right? I think that there's something here. Again, totally biased, but I would love to get your examples of when you've done this and how it's played out, because so far we're batting about 100%. All right, so let's start with prospecting. So like I said at the beginning, the sales cycle is a series of decisions. It's a series of decisions for the buyer. Every time they interact with you, every time they see an email from you, that buyer is making a decision as to whether they want to continue to talk to you, right? So in that instance, there's 4 things that I recommend you think about when you're talking about prospecting in your organizations. First one is to make them feel. All right, so I get, like right now when I'm sitting here, if there was like a pinball machine noise on my phone for every email I get, it would be going crazy, because I get a lot. Like a lot of people reach out to me. And I actually started to create a folder, and I've just been throwing them all in there. And then over the last couple of weeks, I've been reading them. 99% of them are completely focused on logic, right? Like we'll take this KPI up to here, we'll do this, we'll reduce the strain on that. None of them are making me feel. So recommendation number 1 is a couple of things. First of all, make yourself human. Put yourself out there in a way that connects you with the buyer when they start to read. A couple of things we do. Number 1 is we've got some of our reps will actually take a picture of themselves using a product and just be like, hey, I love this product. By the way, like just making that little connection at the beginning stimulates the feeling brain to engage. All right? So be human, be yourself, make that connection. When I say send a picture of yourself, here's one way not to do it. This one just came through a couple weeks ago. Like, isn't that the creepiest thing you've ever seen? I hope she's not in the room. Like, that would be really embarrassing. But, putting a crazy picture of yourself, like, don't do that, right? Like, write that down. But here's just an example of one that I just got a couple of weeks ago. And the second piece is to use feeling words. All right, so if something is difficult, and then, or it could be rough, what words should you use? You should actually use the word rough. There's a lot of neuro-linguistic programming that you can do around what words to use, but the word rough is more tactile. It actually makes a more feeling impact than the word difficult. Like I could totally nerd out with you. Ryan and the crew don't want me to talk for 3 hours, but I could nerd out with you about what words to use. But this is a great email in that it tried to click kind of check the box on prestige. Like, oh man, your background is awesome. I want you on our customer advisory board, right? And I was just like, all right, I'm going to read this one. Like, that's kind of interesting. And then, like, the pessimist in me was just like, wait, I'm not a customer. So I guess I need to buy something to be on this customer advisory board, right? But I kept going. There was pathway to equity. Like, again, this is a guy reaching out for his startup that's trying to hit my pocket. And then he positions himself using the word prestigious in the accelerator that they use. Now, again, this is just one example, but think about the words you're using. My advice, again, is to focus on how do we make them feel right out of the gate. Because every sentence they're making a decision as to whether they want to continue to talk to them. All right? The second piece is meet them where they are. All right, so how many of you have seen the movie Office Space? Like all of you, most of you? So when I say that, these individuals that you're reaching out to, first of all, you're practicing interruptive marketing, all right? So whether you're cold calling, whether you're emailing, these people are doing something else. Whether it's checking their fantasy football scores or actually doing work, they're doing something else. But in most cases, or in many cases, these people that you're reaching out to have challenges that are going on that minute. And when the phone rings, they're not going, oh man, I hope it's a sales guy, right? What they're maybe hoping is, man, my life sucks right now, and I hope this person can help me out. All right? So if you don't meet them where they are, there's the concept of gravity, right? Meet them where they are. Try to diagnose what challenges this individual is likely facing. Start with feeling, and then roll into, hey, I bet you're dealing with this right now. And if you're not, let me know. All right? So focus on them. Avoid the wee-wee. Like it's, I can't remember the guy. It was from Corporate Visions, Tim Reiseter. He talked about the concept of wee-weeing. Like nobody wants to hear about your wee-wee. Wee is when you just talk about yourself. Like, this is how many customers we've got. Here's our mission statement. I know you don't like, how can you possibly care about that? Hey, we've got an office in Singapore. I know you don't, but we think it's cool. Here's our NASCAR slide of a bunch of companies that have nothing to do with your industry. Like, it's like that's crazy to me, right? But essentially, that's what the wee is, right? You've got to focus on them. You've got to meet them where they are in their world of hurt and make that better. Otherwise, again, every step of the way, they're going to make the decision to move on. Okay? All right. Number 3 is this tapping of the reptilian brain. So a couple of things here. The reptilian brain, again, is that instinctual brain, right? And there's a couple of little buttons that you can hit here. Number 1 is the fear of missing out. All right, so the reptilian in you feels like if there's a cost in my decision that I'm going to lose something, this is where I should hit it, right? And so tapping that, so that fear of missing out. There's also the concept of tribes. So what are tribes? So tribes, first of all, this conference is a tribe. All right, so when you come here with people, you're a gathering of people and the energy that'll come out of that. That's why all these technology companies do user conferences, because it fosters the concept of tribes. But the other piece of this is to think about just this, it's a crazy decision that your brain makes, but here it goes. You're in a new town, a new city you've never been to. You and a buddy, you and your spouse, walking down the street. You see a restaurant on the left and a restaurant on the right. The one on the left has got some people in front of it. And you can see in the window that there's some people. The one on the right looks pretty empty. Which one are you going to go to?
Left.
Right. Why? Is the food better? Is the prices better? Is it? No. It's your brain. It's that reptilian brain that's contributing to this concept of tribes or herds. So it's not about spouting off about your million customers. It's about, hey, there's this tribe of companies like you that you should be paying attention to. Apple did it, I don't remember what year it was, but back when it was the early 80s when they had their commercial that came out. If you remember that commercial, there was a bunch of people, these drones basically, that were sitting in a theater. And they were just like mindlessly watching the screen. And then this athletic woman comes in with a hammer and hits it at the screen. And what they were trying to portray there is that they were differentiating not on their product, but on their customers, right? You've got an opportunity to do that. So if you can make the tie between the customer that you're prospecting into versus the customer that they are, you can actually differentiate on that. Apple spent the next 20 years talking about, hey, all the cool kids are on Apple, right? That's how they differentiated. Was their product better at the time? Probably not. There wasn't a whole lot of differentiation there, but the cool kids were doing it, so all the cool kids were signing up. All right? So there's an update. That's good news. So let's move on to presenting. Cool. So let's move on to the presenting. So the prospecting again. Again, that's not a whole lot on transparency, but that's a whole lot on making them feel. Oh, the other thing I wanted to chime in on the reptilian brain is you've got to keep your content short. If you go to Amazon.com, Zappos.com, all of those companies, when you read their product descriptions, what do you see? You see a couple of sentences and a little button that says, click here to read more. You know why they do that? Because of your brain, your reptilian brain. All right? Because they know that a consumer, when given too much information, can't decide. And they will move on real quick. But if given the option for more information, they might click on it and go down. You can't do that in your emails, I know, but there is the opportunity, and I would try this. Again, measure everything. Write your opening note, keep it short, keep it focused on feeling and tribes, make yourself human. And then at the end, just say, hey, if you want a little more information, put it below your signature block. So they'll have to scroll down, but they're not afraid of it. All right? Or point them somewhere they can go engage more. But don't put it in your email. Any email that I see that reads like War and Peace, delete. All right? So let's talk about the presenting piece. Remember when I talked about this is an enablement issue that I'm trying to work with enablers to figure out how to fix. We don't want to teach our sales people to talk about why we suck, right? That's not the goal. The goal is to differentiate through presenting yourself as a 4.2 to 4.5. So here's what I did at that fashion retailer. And I did it at a food company that we just talked to, and like the results are really crazy. One of the things that we do, well, obviously we know where our competition is better than us, all right? So we would make the list of that. And then what we would do is identify 2 to 3 of them and lead with it during the conversation. All right, so I know that sounds crazy. I think most of you are like, all right, dude, you lost me. But I'm telling you, it works. I did it at this, this fashion retailer. Went in, I was just like, listen. One part of the conversation, he was like, just tell me how you guys are different. And I was like, well, they've got this technology here that they've developed and they're focused on in a big way, and they're actually kicking our butt right here. But in that fashion retail space, here's why we've had so many companies choose us. Here's the things that set us apart. So if those other 2 things are really, really important, then like we should probably dig in further, but that's not an area we're looking to develop. All right? And then as a part of it, I talked about, hey, listen, we've had a couple of customers that are up here in New York that have had this challenge and this challenge. What does your implementation look like? Like, let's get into that. Just make sure we're eyes wide open. And again, the guy melted on me. Like, seriously, he was like gonna hug me on the way out. This works. I'm telling you, it's crazy. And then don't forget to make them feel, all right? That feeling piece is the way they're going to make decisions. Start with feel, end with feel. Okay? All right, and then the last piece of this is negotiating. So how do you negotiate transparently? Let me tell you a little story. So I'll kind of finish up here on a story. A long time ago, this is 2008, I was the SVP of sales for a company called Right Hemisphere. That's no longer around, but we were selling, it was kind of the beginning of SaaS, but we were selling these tools that help companies take CAD drawings and make them usable for like marketing and the rest of the org. We were talking to Schlumberger. So Schlumberger, monster oil services company in Houston that many people have never heard of. And my rep was in this long negotiation with them. And so the rep calls me up, and I won't say his name, but his initials are Chris Borman. So Chris calls me up, and he's like, Todd, I need you down in Houston. We got to do this negotiation. Their procurement lead is just like, hey, I don't want you going back and forth. Can you just get everybody in the room and do this? Like that. Fly down to Houston. I walk in, like we get in the elevator, go up, open the conference room doors, and there's not one guy, there's 6 people. And they're looking at me like they're gonna eat my lunch, right? And this is a $1.5 million deal that we're working on. So that's where transparent negotiation was born. I said, thanks, Chris. But then I went up to the whiteboard and I wrote these 4 things on the wall. And I was like, hey, listen, in the spirit of transparency, I know what you're going to ask for. Let me tell you what's important to us. And we'll use that as a guide to our conversation. Number 1, how much do you buy? You buy more, that helps us. We're willing to pay you for that in the form of a discount. And I literally used that language. Number 2, it was, how fast are you going to pay? All right? The faster you pay, the better for us. We'll pay you for that in the form of a discount. The third one, how long you commit. The longer the better for us. We'll pay you for that in the form of a discount. And then number 4, when are you going to sign? Because that helps me forecast. Helps my rep forecast. It helps them meet quotas. So there's value to us as an organization. You commit to us in the form of a sequence of events that we'll stay to, and pay for that in the form of a discount. What ended up happening? They're like, Todd, that's great. We need 30% off. Like, all right, cool. I'm glad I set this up. Let's go through each one by one. Can you commit to more? Well, no, we've been scoping this thing for 6 months. Okay. Can you pay faster? I noticed on your balance sheet you got $17 billion on it. Like maybe you want to pay for the whole 3 years up front. And they were like, that could be interesting. And so I laid out a discount percentage based on that. How long can you commit? We can commit for, like the current deal's 2 years. Hey, can we make it 3 to 5 years? I mean, once you get this in, you're not going to rip it out. And if it sucks, you've got protections for warranty in the contract. So why don't you commit to longer? Oh, maybe we can do that. And the last one was when you sign. It was July, so beautiful, balmy weather in Houston. And we were like, hey, can we get this thing done? Like, can I take this thing up to the board and say it's coming in by the end of September? And they're like, all right, we'll work on that. Like, hey, if you can make that happen, we'll give you a little bit more. And what happened? We didn't get to 30%, but I gave them a path to it using transparency. What happened at the end of September? They called and said, signer is like on a ship in the ocean. and you can't even send a smoke signal out to them. Sure. They said, hey, can you get this thing, if we do this in October, will you still give us the discount? My answer was always, I don't know. What I do know is if you get it done in September, you got that discount. Let's talk about October and October. And I was like, dude, I need a firmer answer though. That's all I can tell you, brother. What ended up happening? Figured out a way to get out into the middle of the ocean and get this guy to sign by the end of September. Because uncertainty is another brain trigger, another reptilian, another piece that talks to the fear of missing out. If you are firm about when that deal expires, that they're like, all right, cool, October it is. If you're unsure, the reptilian brain kicks in and they do everything they can to get the deal done. All right, so that's transparency in prospecting and feeling. That's transparency in presenting. That's transparency in negotiating. There's a lot more to it. But I implore you to try it out because number one, the advice to you that you can walk away with today is start to think about how you position with your buyers that you are not perfect, but you're pretty close. All right? Because again, like I said, as you get to a 5, we are all taught to present and sell as though we're a 5. As we get close to a 5, conversion actually goes down. So sell as though you're a 4.2 to 4.5. We are also all taught to sell as though, sell based on logic. So start to think about how you get feeling into that dialogue. Feeling with, make yourself human. Connect with the consumer, the buyer. Meet them where they are, the concept of gravity. Touch on that reptilian brain. Make them feel at every step, because every step they're making another decision as to whether they want to continue to invest time with you. And then the last thing is when the buyer decides they feel confident, check the boxes, right? And that means you've got to touch all those different elements of the brain, all right? Because they're going to buy based on how they feel, and they're going to justify it based on logic. All right, you do all 3 of those things, give it a try. I would love to hear feedback as you roll it out. I know it's different, but again, the world of selling has evolved for 1 billion years, however long it's been. I firmly believe it's about to again, and I think this is it. So I'm happy to take any questions. Yes, Chris?
So Todd, selling to 4.2 to 4.5, do you think that takes more training or less training?
It's going to take more training for your younger reps. So a younger rep is going to have a real hard time. Like when we think about the prospecting element, we're not really putting in the transparent part yet, but we are touching on the feeling because that's something we can train and get pretty consistent on. But over time, this is going to be hard to train. That's like when Challenger first came out, like there was no materials for it. It was just like, here's a philosophy, figure it out. And so that's kind of, I think, where this might be. But at some point, we're going to need to talk through what are the different points that we talk to and how do we make it mechanized so that we can go, here's the 2 points of differentiation, that they're better than us. How do we position that in a way that doesn't make it sound like we suck? Yeah?
How do you get the product team to support this crazy approach because they tend to only want to tell you that everything's a 5.0 and hide the landmines that they know exist as if they're like dependent on it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, so I was SVP of sales for the last 3 years, and I just moved into a CRO role. So I'm seeing the whole buyer journey from prospecting to long-term customer value. And the way that I'm doing it is, every month we sit down with the product team and go through churn. And some of that churn is avoidable. A lot of the churn happens from a poor onboarding experience. So if you get them onboarded in a really good experience in that first year, their odds of renewing goes way up. If you don't set expectations properly before the sale and at the sale, that experience is lower and churn goes up. And so product is measured not only on new sales, new product rollout, win rate, but they're also measured on long-term churn. So that's the way to do it. And I think maybe teaching them the brain science is a little premature, but you could get there. So, yeah.
Kind of along the same lines, but I'll use marketing team instead of product team. It seems like a lot of what you're talking about might fly in the face of marketing strategy, marketing messaging.
Yeah, I mean, this is an evolution. My prediction is it's probably going to be completely necessary by about 2020. We're going to have to figure it out. From a marketing perspective, I think marketing concentrates on feeling and get them in. And then the salesperson then engages with the transparency. I think that's how it's going to go. But marketing product marketing is going to have to support some of the elements that make you not so perfect. And a lot of it is that competitive intelligence. Like if you can find 3, 4, 5 different things that are differentiators that your competition's better than you at, you got to pick the 2 that are going to make you transparent but not make you, like, you know, I bought a vacuum, and the negative reviews on the vacuum had to do with the cord length, but it picks up pet hair amazingly well. I got 2 dogs and 2 cats, right? Like the cord length didn't matter to me, and so that's going to be the trick too. Yeah.
Well, it was interesting, not in a selling course, but last time I was talking about a long-time Learncore customer, and I just asked a question and said, you know, what is it that you wish Learncore did that didn't do? And they were open and honest and said, I wish it did this, and I'm like, well, I don't need that. Right? So, for you, it's an interesting piece, but it was interesting. I respected that review 100 times more than if they would have told me, no, Learncore is perfect, everything about them is perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you look at all these product sites that you all shop at, that they have negative reviews on their own pages, on their own product detail pages. You know why? Because of the brain science behind it. So I would just, you know, to your point, embrace your vulnerabilities, and then just watch out. Because when the client is going and talking to a reference, or they're going to an analyst, or they're even going to G2, they may never come back, right? When you've got them, hold them. And that's what's going to speed your sales cycle. All right, yep.
I would love to geek out with you on all of it. I'm a big advocate of it. And a lot of what you're saying, I believe what you're saying 100%, because I've seen evidence of it in books like Think Fast and Slow, and Originals, and Chaos, and I love the way that you've synthesized it. So if we all wanted to geek out, are there any other books? Because a lot of this is storytelling, because in order for us to then take the research, which we love, and that would kill our sales reps, like they would literally think we were crazy, and format it or frame it in a way that makes sense to them. Do you have any recommendations on where we would want to?
Yeah, I think, so I'm a podcast nerd. Like I live in Palatine, so I train in every day downtown here. And so I've been, Persuasion is an amazing book by Robert Cialdini. There's a lot of brain science in there, and just look at some of the stuff that he's done in the past. I can share a list out because there's 3 or 4 books that I've read recently that really tap into it, that got me thinking awful lot about this. Yeah. So more to come. Again, we're kind of at the infancy stage here, but I think there's something coming. So yes.
It's so interesting you're using the word transparency. We use 2 words that may be similar. We teach generosity and authenticity as part of how we do what you're talking about. How do you train people in your organization to leverage that transparency in little moments or little training exercises?
Yeah, we haven't really yet. I've been the nerd on it, and then I've got a couple of my leaders that are helping out and trying different things. Again, I've tried it at 3 different companies. This food service company, I actually talked up one of the things that our competitor is doing that we're not doing. And I was just like, hey, this looks really cool. We're not there. We're probably a few years away from it. And he was like, Todd, that's not cool. Why are you selling that? I don't think that's an advantage. I think it's a distraction. All right, cool. Right? So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to roll in, but we have not done any formal training on it. Again, it's like me and my crazy, mixed up mind. Yes, last question.
We're a force management or growth play shop, and it's like a language at our company, and everyone is required to go through training and speak the same taxonomy, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that this can be included?
This meaning this content, or is it?
This concept.
I think it should. Especially the feeling stuff. That's something you can implement right away. Right. Is to read an email and go, does this invoke any feeling? Or is it just robotic that's going to mix in with the other 120 emails that the buyer got today? So I think there's some of that can be put in right away. But again, the way the brain makes decisions every single time is based on feeling first and then logic. And if you're presenting yourself as being perfect, you're actually going to slow your sales cycles. It's going to be an evolving thing, but I think there's some things you can put in right away. especially around the prospecting. And then the negotiation, by the way, is something that we trained all of our reps. I trained everybody at Exact Target. So when I was running enablement there, we had 300 sellers that were all transparently negotiating. What ended up happening is sales cycle shrunk just from that thing. Win rates went up, and our time to cash went way up. So like the negotiation thing is something you could teach right away. Just like, hey, here's our 4 levers. Go in, show the client. When we talk about pricing, when we put it in a proposal, and then when we get to negotiation, it's a million times easier. All right.
Thanks very much, Todd.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.